What happens when a royal guest mistakes a morning chat show for his personal platform and discovers that daytime television hosts don't bow to anyone? In just 29 seconds, Prince Harry went from charming royal to public relations nightmare, all because he underestimated the woman sitting across from him. This is the story of how Judi Love, beloved Loose Women panelist, became the host who dared to do what millions only dreamed of. She looked a prince in the eye and told him exactly where he could take his entitled attitude. It started like any other Tuesday morning on the Loose Women set. The studio buzzed with its usual energy as Judi Love settled into her hosting chair, flanked by panelists Ruth Langsford, Janet Street Porter, and Colleen Nolan. The show's iconic purple and pink backdrop gleamed under the studio lights, and the audience sat ready for another hour of unfiltered conversation. Right then, ladies, Judi announced with her trademark warmth, we've got quite the show lined up today. Our special guest joining us shortly is none other than Prince Harry himself. Ruth raised an eyebrow. Should be interesting, that one. Always has plenty to say these days, doesn't he? Janet snorted. Plenty to say and plenty to complain about, more like. Hope he's ready for some proper questions, not the softball nonsense he usually gets. Colleen leaned forward conspiratorially. I heard from the producers he specifically requested to speak about his latest charity work. Something about wanting to set the record straight on a few things. Well, Judi said, straightening her blazer, he's come to the right place for straight talk. We don't do royal protocol here, do we, girls? The audience laughed as the familiar Loose Women theme music began to fade. Behind the cameras, producers gave their final signals. This was live television at its most unpredictable, and everyone in the studio could feel the electric anticipation. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Loose Women. Judi addressed the cameras with her signature smile. I'm Judi Love, and joining me today are the fabulous Ruth Langsford, Janet Street Porter, and Colleen Nolan. Each woman waved to the enthusiastic audience applause. Now then, Judi continued, we're absolutely delighted to welcome our special guest today. He's a father, a husband, and yes, he happens to be a prince. Please give a warm Loose Women welcome to Prince Harry. Harry strode onto the set wearing a crisp navy suit and that practiced royal smile. He waved to the audience before taking his seat opposite the panel, but something in his posture, the way he surveyed the women before him, suggested this wasn't going to be the cozy chat the producers had planned. Your Royal Highness, Judi began warmly, lovely to have you with us this morning. Please, just Harry, he interrupted, though his tone carried an edge that didn't match his words. I thought we'd established that I'm just a private citizen now. Ruth exchanged a quick glance with Janet. The interview was 30 seconds old and already felt tense. Of course, Harry. Judi recovered smoothly. You're here to talk about your work with veterans charities. Tell us about that. Harry shifted in his chair, and something flickered across his face. Well, Judi, before we get into that, I think it's important to address some of the misconceptions that have been floating around in the British media. Misconceptions? Colleen asked, leaning forward slightly. Yes, misconceptions, Harry repeated, his voice taking on a lecturing tone. You see, when someone like me tries to speak their truth, to share their authentic experience, there are always those who want to twist it, to make it about something it's not. Janet's eyebrow shot up. And what exactly are you suggesting has been twisted? Well, Janet, Harry said, using her name like he was addressing a child, I think anyone with half a brain can see what's been happening. The systematic campaign to discredit me, to paint me as some sort of troublemaker when all I'm trying to do is modernize an ancient institution and protect my family. The studio fell silent. This wasn't charity talk. This was something else entirely. Judi felt the shift immediately. Years of hosting experience told her that her guest had just hijacked the interview, and not in a good way. Harry, she said carefully, we invited you here to discuss your charitable work, not to relitigate family disputes. Family disputes? Harry's voice rose slightly. Is that what you call it when someone is systematically excluded? When their mental health is dismissed? When they're forced to choose between their family and their sanity? Ruth cleared her throat. With respect, Harry, our viewers tune in for honest conversation, not therapy sessions. The prince's eyes flashed. Honest conversation? Right, because this show is known for its depth and nuance, isn't it? The insult hung in the air like smoke. Colleen's mouth dropped open. Janet's face darkened. Ruth sat back in her chair, stunned. But Judi Love, the woman who had worked her way up from comedy clubs to national television, who had faced down hecklers and hostile crowds, who had never backed down from anyone regardless of their title or status, felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. I'm sorry, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. Did you just insult this show and by extension, everyone sitting at this table? Harry seemed to realize his mistake, but it was too late to take it back. I didn't mean. No, Judi interrupted, holding up her hand. Let's be very clear about what just happened here. You came on our show as our guest, and you just suggested that we lack depth and nuance. You've dismissed the intelligence of our viewers and the professionalism of this panel. The audience was dead silent now, sensing the dramatic shift in atmosphere. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Harry said, but his voice lacked conviction. The only misunderstanding here, Judi continued, her voice gaining strength, is yours. You seem to think that because you have a title, because you were born into privilege, that gives you the right to come into our space and disrespect us. Now hold on, Harry said, his own voice rising. I never said anything about titles or privilege. I'm here trying to do good work, trying to make a difference. And instead of supporting that, you're attacking me. Janet couldn't help herself. Attacking you? Love, you're the one who walked in here with an attitude. An attitude? Harry turned to face Janet directly. I came here in good faith to discuss important issues, and instead, I'm being ambushed by a panel of middle-aged women who seem more interested in stirring up drama than having a real conversation. The words landed like grenades. Middle-aged women. The dismissive tone. The casual contempt. Ruth's face went white with anger. Colleen sat frozen in shock. Janet's hands clenched into fists, but it was Judi who spoke, and when she did, her voice carried the weight of every woman who had ever been dismissed, talked down to, or treated as less than. Stop right there, she said, standing up from her chair. Stop right there, Harry. The prince looked genuinely surprised that someone had dared to interrupt him. He sat back in his chair, mouth slightly open, as Judi Love towered over the panel desk with the commanding presence that had made her one of British television's most respected hosts. You just called us middle-aged women like it was an insult, Judi continued, her voice carrying across the silent studio. Like our age, our gender, somehow makes us less qualified to ask you questions. Let me tell you something about middle-aged women, Harry. We're the ones who built careers while raising families. We're the ones who survived decades in industries that told us we weren't good enough, smart enough, or pretty enough. Ruth found her voice, standing to join Judi. We're the ones who learned to fight for every opportunity we ever got. And we're certainly not going to be lectured by someone who's never had to work for anything in his entire life, Janet added, her Yorkshire accent cutting through the tension like a blade. Harry's face was flushing red now. You don't know anything about my life, about what I've been through, about the struggles I've faced. Struggles? Colleen finally spoke up, her voice incredulous. You want to talk about struggles? Try being a single mother working 3 jobs. Try being told you're too old for television when you're 40. Try building something from nothing instead of being handed everything on a silver platter. I served in the military, Harry shot back. I've seen combat. I've dealt with real trauma. And we respect that, Judi said, still standing. But your military service doesn't give you a free pass to disrespect people. It certainly doesn't give you the right to come into our workplace and treat us like we're beneath you. The prince was spiraling now, his carefully crafted public persona cracking under pressure. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This is the kind of treatment that drove me away from public life in the first place. The constant questioning, the refusal to show basic respect. Respect? Janet's voice rose to match his. You want respect? Then show some. You don't walk into someone's house and insult the furniture. This isn't your house, Harry snapped. This is a television studio. I'm here as a guest trying to promote important charitable work, and instead of focusing on that, you're making this personal. Judi slowly sat back down, but her posture remained rigid with controlled anger. You made it personal the moment you decided we weren't worth your respect. You came here with an agenda that had nothing to do with charity and everything to do with your own grievances. My grievances? Harry's voice cracked slightly. You think wanting to protect my family, wanting to speak out against injustice, those are just grievances? What I think, Ruth interjected coldly, is that you're using this platform to settle personal scores while hiding behind the language of social justice. That's completely unfair, Harry protested, but his voice was losing its earlier confidence. Is it? Colleen asked. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you came here expecting us to nod along while you complained about your family, your former life, your struggles with institutions that literally every working person in Britain would give anything to be part of. The audience was transfixed. This wasn't the usual daytime television fare of celebrity interviews and lifestyle segments. This was raw, unfiltered confrontation between 2 completely different worlds. You don't understand, Harry said. and for the first time, his voice carried a note of desperation. The pressure, the scrutiny, the way every word gets twisted. "Oh, we understand pressure," Janet said with bitter laugh. "We understand scrutiny. The difference is, we don't have teams of publicists and millions of pounds to cushion us when things go wrong. And we certainly don't have the luxury of running away to California when things get tough," Ruth added. Harry's composure finally snapped completely. "Running away? I left to protect my family from a toxic system that was destroying our mental health, that was destroying my wife, my children. Then why are you still talking about it?" Judi asked, her question cutting through his emotional outburst like a scalpel. "If you left for peace, for privacy, for your family's well-being, then why are you here, on television, relitigating the same conflicts you claim to have walked away from?" The question hung in the air, and Harry had no answer. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came. "Because," Judi continued, answering her own question, "this isn't about protecting your family. This is about your ego. This is about the fact that you can't stand that the world moved on without you." "That's not true," Harry whispered, but even he didn't sound convinced. "Isn't it?" Colleen asked gently, almost sadly. "Because everything you've said today, every complaint, every grievance, it all comes back to the same thing. You expected the world to stop and listen when you decided to speak. You expected institutions to change because you asked them to. You expected us to treat you differently because of who your father island." The studio was so quiet now that the hum of the cameras seemed deafening. "But here's the thing about real life," Ruth said, her voice softer now but no less firm. "People don't owe you anything just because you exist. Respect is earned, not inherited." Harry looked around the panel, seeming to realize for the first time that he had completely lost control of the narrative. The four women staring back at him weren't impressed by his title, weren't intimidated by his status, and weren't buying his victim narrative. "I think," he said slowly, "there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about why I'm here." "No," Judi said firmly, "there hasn't been any misunderstanding. You're here because you thought you could use our platform to rehabilitate your image. You thought you could come on a show hosted by women and we'd be so starstruck that we'd forget to ask real questions. You thought we'd give you the soft soap treatment because we're just daytime television," Janet added. "But what you forgot," Colleen continued, "is that women have been dealing with entitled men our entire lives. We know the signs, we know the tactics, and we're not afraid to call it out," Ruth finished. Harry sat in his chair, looking smaller somehow than when he'd walked onto the set just minutes earlier. The confident prince who had strolled in ready to lecture Britain through its television screens was gone, replaced by a man who suddenly understood that titles meant nothing when faced with people who had earned their positions through talent and determination. "You know what the real tragedy is here?" Judi said, leaning forward with the measured tone of someone delivering a final verdict. "You had a platform that millions of people would kill for. You had influence, resources, genuine ability to make change, and instead of using it constructively, you've turned it into a weapon against the very people who supported you." Harry tried one last desperate gambit. "Everything I've done has been about service, about making the world better for future generations." "Service?" Janet's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Love. Service is doing the work without needing constant praise for it. Service is showing up even when no one's watching. What you're describing is performance." "You want to know what real service looks like?" Ruth asked, her voice steady and sure. "It looks like Colleen here, raising kids on her own while building a career. It looks like Janet, fighting for women's rights in journalism when there were barely any women in newsrooms. It looks like Judi coming from nothing and making something of herself through pure talent and determination." "Service," Colleen added quietly, "is our viewers who watch this show while they're caring for elderly parents, working multiple jobs, dealing with real problems that don't get solved by moving to mansions in Montecito." The comparison was devastating in its simplicity. Here sat four women who had built their careers through decades of hard work, facing down every obstacle that British society could throw at working women, and across from them sat a man whose greatest hardship was being asked to fulfill the duties that came with unimaginable privilege. "I never asked for this life," Harry said weakly, making one final attempt to reclaim sympathy. "None of us asked for our lives," Judi replied, and her voice carried the weight of absolute finality. "The difference is, we made the best of what we were given without expecting the world to feel sorry for us." The silence that followed was deafening. Harry looked around the panel, perhaps hoping to find even a crack of sympathy, but found only four faces that had seen through every excuse, every deflection, every attempt to avoid accountability. "I think," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, Perhaps this was a mistake. Yes, Judi said simply. It was. The words hung between them like a confession, not just that coming on the show was a mistake, but that everything, the entire approach, the whole strategy of public complaints and victim narratives had been fundamentally wrong from the beginning. You could have been better than this, Ruth said, and there was genuine sadness in her voice now. You had every advantage, every opportunity. You could have been a force for real good. Instead, Janet continued, you chose to be a cautionary tale about what happens when privilege meets entitlement and never learns the difference between respect and deference. Harry stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the studio floor. I don't have to listen to this. No, Judi said, standing as well. You don't. That's been your problem all along. You've never had to listen to anything you didn't want to hear. You've never had to face consequences for your actions. You've never had to earn anything. But here's what you're going to do now, she continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent years commanding respect, rather than demanding it. You're going to leave this set. You're going to go back to your privileged life. And you're going to think very carefully about whether you want to continue this path of public self-pity or whether you want to actually do something worthwhile with the opportunities you've been given. Harry looked like he wanted to argue, wanted to have the last word, but something in Judi's expression stopped him. Perhaps he finally recognized that he was outmatched, that he had wandered into a battle he was never equipped to fight. Ladies and gentlemen, Judi said, turning to address the camera directly while Harry stood frozen beside his chair. Sometimes on live television, we get to see people exactly as they are. Not the carefully crafted image, not the polished public persona, but the real person underneath. She paused, letting her words sink in both for the audience and for the man still standing awkwardly on the set. And sometimes, she continued, that person turns out to be exactly what you suspected all along. Someone who mistakes being born lucky for being special. Someone who confuses having a platform with having something worth saying. Someone who thinks that because they've faced challenges, the world owes them endless sympathy and unquestioning support. Harry finally found his voice, though it came out as little more than a croak. This is exactly the kind of treatment that forced me to leave public life. No, Colleen said softly, speaking for all of them. This is the kind of treatment you get when you forget that respect goes both ways. When you forget that having a title doesn't make you better than other people. When you forget that real strength comes from building others up, not tearing institutions down because they wouldn't bend to your will. The prince looked around one final time, perhaps hoping for rescue that was never going to come. The producers remained behind their cameras. The audience sat in stunned silence. Even his own security detail seemed to understand that this was a moment that had to play out to its natural conclusion. Your Royal Highness, Judi said, using his title now with deliberate formality, I think it's time for you to go. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of absolute authority. Not the authority of position or birth, but the authority that comes from being absolutely, undeniably right. Harry walked toward the exit without another word. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. The studio doors closed behind him with a soft click that seemed to echo in the silence he left behind. Judi remained standing for a moment, watching the doors, then slowly turned back to face the cameras. Well then, she said, her natural warmth returning as if someone had flipped a switch. That was unexpected. But you know what? Sometimes unexpected is exactly what we need. Sometimes we need to be reminded that nobody, and I mean nobody, is above being held accountable for how they treat other people. The audience erupted in applause. Not the polite studio applause that greets celebrity guests, but the kind of genuine, thunderous approval that comes from watching someone speak truth to power. Right then, Janet said, grinning for the first time since the interview began. Shall we move on to discussing whether pineapple belongs on pizza? The laughter that followed was cathartic, washing away the tension of the previous minutes and returning the studio to its familiar, comfortable atmosphere. Before we do that, though, Ruth said, still smiling, I think we need to acknowledge something. What just happened here, what Judi did, that took real courage. Standing up to someone with that much privilege, that much power, that's not easy. It shouldn't be courage, though, should it? Colleen mused. Treating people with basic respect, expecting the same in return, that should just be normal. But it's not normal, Judi said, settling back into her chair. And that's exactly why moments like this matter. Because somewhere out there, someone needed to see that you don't have to accept being talked down to, no matter who's doing the talking. The cameras continued to roll, capturing 4 women who had just reminded an entire nation that respect isn't something you inherit. It's something you earn. And sometimes, just sometimes, the people who need to learn that lesson the most are the ones who think they're above learning anything at all. As the show moved on to lighter topics, the doors through which Prince Harry had made his exit remained firmly closed. He was gone, but the lesson he'd inadvertently taught remained. Broadcast live to millions of viewers who had just watched ordinary people refused to be diminished by extraordinary privilege. It was, in its own way, the most important 29 minutes in British daytime television history.